Good afternoon, Luang Phor.
Good afternoon, Raja Soko.
So, today is Wednesday, the 18th of February 2026. Thank you for this opportunity to ask some questions. Today's topic, which I was hoping you would address, is only a very straightforward question. It's relating to this notion of post-traumatic stress syndrome, what we call PTSD. And more recently, there's been this emergence of this notion of complex PTSD, relating to situations that are not as straightforward as being traumatized by kind of raw abuse kind of situations, but sometimes more just referring to the trauma of life, and one could say that all of us experience to some extent, some people more, some people less, in their childhood, growing up, in life generally. But there's this notion that we carry around some trauma, and so some time ago, someone was asking, does one need to work through the layers of trauma before we can use the Dhamma for the sake of liberation from suffering or not? So that's the general picture, and I was wondering what you had to offer as a reflection around these things.
Well, like, when we think of our past, we've all experienced trauma of some sort. That's part of life's experience. And if I feel I have to work through all the traumas of my past, that's still the ego thinking that I am somebody that has past traumas. And so we can go around thinking I can't really practice meditation or liberation until I work through all my PTSD. And I encourage you to just listen to that. That's the word that didn't exist a few years ago. And now it's books have been written about it, and videos, and psychologists talk about it. But it's just another name, another word in English language to describe dukkha, or what the Buddha called the first noble truth. Because in my own experience, I never thought of myself having PTSD, because it's a word that came into popularity very recently. And I listen to my ego. It says, have you worked through all your suffering of the past, your PTSD, or CPTSD, and it's just, to me, it's just using the language to describe dukkha, the first noble truth, where the Buddha is teaching us to understand dukkha is not to think that all the CPTSD is very personal. To see it always as my problem, my abuse, my CPTSD, and that kind of thinking creates it into a separate person who lives a separate life. And when you understand suffering, the suffering is like this. It's dissatisfaction, or it can be CPTSD, it can be PTSD, it can be abusive, traumatic experiences in childhood. It whatever words you want to give it, it is dukkha or suffering. And to understand it is to not think that you have to do anything about it, but to just observe that the words you're using create the illusion of separation. And if you never break through that illusion, then you're stuck the rest of your life with thinking you've got to do something about abuses from the past, bad memories, unwholesome activities you performed in the past. It goes on endlessly. So this is, in the Four Noble Truths, is simpleness. It shouldn't be, there is suffering, it should be understood. And to understand something means you have to get beneath it and understand it, not from the personal possession of my suffering, but to just see suffering is like this. It can be as simple as being sad that the rose is drooping. The roses you put in my room, drooping, and I could say, how sad life is, but if I just observe, be the witness to my own emotional reaction to drooping flowers or faded conditions or old age, then I think, like being my age, I think of my age, 91, I'm a 91-year-old person, or seeing it in terms of the body is 91 years old, and it's a condition, it's not a real person. But as long as I believe in the conventional reality that I am 91 years old, or conventional, well, it's fair enough. But in terms of understanding suffering, it's not enough. This is 91 years old what you really are, or are you the awareness of 91 years old being a sankhara condition that you create through convention, through habit?
Do you mind if I bring in a couple of examples? You've met people when you were in Thailand and you ordained, who came into the robes and who had been exposed to the Vietnam War. You've seen what kind of states of mind they relive when the memories arise in meditation, and they find it very difficult to bear with that. There's an overwhelming quality to the emotional distress that arises when those memories arise, when the conditioning arises. So it can be people who have experienced war and carry that kind of stress and trauma in them. That seems to be just too much. The experience seems to be too much to bear. Just sitting with it overwhelms them. People freak out and they don't find they have the resources to just bear with it. And similar testimonies come from people who have suffered childhood abuse, for example, in particular physical or sexual nature, sometimes emotional nature as well. And when this conditioning resurfaces, especially when people sit down to meditate or sit retreats or whatever, it's almost like it just carries them off their feet, and they don't have the resources it takes to just sit with it and see it as not personal, as you say.
Yeah, well, it's easier to say just sit with it till it vanishes. But sometimes, like, the psychotherapy helps to discuss it with somebody who understands the problem. So my experience with people with that problem go to the various therapists that are willing to listen to them, to help them bring forth their fear or anxiety or anger, resentment. But even then, the psychotherapy doesn't really resolve the issue. It helps to bring it to the surface. Where if you really have trust in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and you have the kind of faith, ability to sit through what seems unbearable. And as I've told you many times about my experiences with Samnera, sitting through 3 months of unmitigated anger and misery and fear. That's before I had a teacher. And I sometimes amazed that I endured it. Because that's 3 months is a long time to just endure all the repressed anger and fear that accumulated over 30 years. But I did have the experience of seeing the end of suffering then, even though I didn't really understand it in terms of Dhamma. But I did wake up one morning without any negative thoughts or memories in my mind. I couldn't even try to remember traumas of the past, of disappointments and anger and resentment. I couldn't, I couldn't hold on to them anymore. They didn't work for me. Wasn't grasping. But at the time, I didn't really know what had happened to me. It was through contemplating the Four Noble Truths that I began to get some perspective on that, on how the mind works. So understanding suffering is not like seeing others in personal terms. That's why I encourage this investigation of my suffering, my dukkha, my aches and pains, my post-traumatic stress disorder, my traumas in the battlefield and so forth. This sense of mind is to be witness to see that these possessive pronouns are quite deluding. Because then you're creating a sense you've got to get rid of these memories. And that's still very personal. It's still an illusion of I have something I've got to get rid of before I can get hold of something called enlightenment. And just by observing, trusting, and witnessing the way you're thinking, you begin to see through this sense of me and mine, and my suffering is more than yours, or you don't know what I've been through, and on and on like that, and listen to yourself thinking in these very personal ways. Because it's a form of grasping, seeing like memories of the past are, make us, like what I remember in my past is not going to be the same as the memories you have of your past. It's never going to be the same for any people at all. But it is memories from the past. And the present is here and now, which is not an illusion, it's not a creation, it's the reality of experience is now. Experience of the past is a memory. And imagining that you've got to get rid of these memories isn't what you imagine about the future. You've got to do something to get rid of something in order to get what you want. And listening up, just make it emphasize what I want, what I want to get in mind. I don't want these traumatic memories anymore. I want to get rid of them completely free from them. And I would do this, I'd reiterate to myself, listening to myself about what I want or don't want, and emphasizing what I want and my suffering. This is mine, and so the sense of me and mine. What about me? I've always had this sense of what about me? Haunt me through my childhood, and feeling jealous of my sister when she seemed to get more attention than I did, and things like that, just emphasizing what I think my opinion is the right opinion. I'm right and you got it all wrong. And listen to that, in terms of like a non-critical witness. You start criticizing yourself for feeling petty or mean or selfish. That's still the ego, I shouldn't be selfish, I should be full of loving kindness and generosity, compassion. And that's, what Du Bochao would say, true but not right, right but not true. Because what you're experiencing right now is, in terms of conditions, is memory. And memory is from the past. And then you imagine a future of getting rid of these memories of the past, and then you can become enlightened in the future. Is an imagination, a sense of obviously I'm going to be enlightened once I get rid of all my defilements. And that's the ego, that's like identity again.
So it really is about not taking it personally, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Because otherwise you fall into either blaming yourself, having to be otherwise, or blaming others who you perceive as responsible for the trauma.
We feel guilty about, those things we've done in the past we regret. Everybody has that. When somebody dies, one of the symptoms of grief is I should have been more loving or more caring, or I didn't give them enough of my compassion. You start creating scenarios in your mind about what you should have done in the past. and then you feel guilty. Guilty is a creation of mind. It's not what you really are. What you really are is apparent here and now, pure conscious awareness. And that's always been with you. But we don't notice it because we're so conditioned by conventions that reinforce this sense of I'm a totally separate person from you. And I'm an individual, and I've been abused in the past, is what we intend to interpret life through conventional thinking. It's not false, but it's not like you shouldn't remember abuse from the past, but remember a memory is a condition in the present. And you take the position of the Buddha in the present, the knowing is like this, which is non-judgmental. It's not saying this is how you should be or shouldn't be, or how life should be or shouldn't be.
Thank you very much for those reflections.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Tapaduta de sangamutta sutavada Isarvanta Manunjantu Sato. This opportunity to reflect on Dhamma the way it is. In this word reflection, that isn't thinking, in terms of right, wrong, good or bad, but in observing. When I give these teachings, how they affect you. Just to be, and not to judge it, say you like or don't like, but just be the witness. The pure witness, the Buddha, observing the arising and ceasing of sankharas. Because that's the nature of sankhara, is to arise and cease. And I was talking with Ajahn Soko yesterday, whose father passed away recently. And so he suggested I reflect on how you can feel that it's a good thing he died, and also feel sad because you recognize how your intellect can produce, in one way, in a practical way. The end of his life was there, there's no chance of getting better. He was emaciated and in a lot of pain. He wanted to go, he was ready to go. And so Asoka and his sisters both were glad in a way that he passed away, but not happy, and because the experience of loss is sad. So just to point out that it's a good thing he passed away is an intellectual statement. Just doesn't feel the intellect, just, passes judgments and things like that, but doesn't really feel like with emotion, the feeling of loss is like this. When one of your parents pass, or your loved ones, or even your pet dog or pet cat, when they die, it's like this. It's sad. It's not, and because sadness is the way it is. And the passing of loss of a loved one is like this. And at the same time, you can think that it was a good thing they passed away. So, just to point out that these two, the intellectual judgment, the practical, rational approach of the intellect, and the emotional feeling of loss may not be the same in any way, but that's the way they are. Intellect can't feel. When you examine your ideals about how you should be, about life should be, about how a monastery should be, about other monks, other nuns should be, that's the intellect, which is judgmental. It's about how things should be. But emotionally, it's not about being perfect, but recognizing that sankharas are, in their very nature, imperfect. Because they arise and cease, they can't sustain themselves. Because the nature of sankhara, which is your body, your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your brain, your emotions, they arise and cease according to conditions. And you can observe that, like reflecting on the wind is reflecting how impermanent the experience limited to this form is very impermanent, very unstable. It's not an ideal condition. We're not ideal forms. We're sankhara, these sankharas. And then you ask yourself, are we really a sankhara? Because can one sankhara observe another sankhara? When we talk about reflecting on the way it is, can a sankhara observe another sankhara? No, it's the consciousness, pure consciousness. Because consciousness through the eyes, ears, nose, the body, brain, mind is impermanent, unstable, unsatisfactory. But behind sensory experience is pure consciousness. So I emphasize this to encourage you during this mental retreat to reflect on that, to really observe, ask yourself, are you really what you believe what you've been told you are? Are you really that? Are you really a man or a woman? There's a lot of problems around the relationship between men and women. And as much as people want equality, the sankharas are not equal. They can't be. They're all different. So these sankharas that we identify with are in space, which is quite obvious. You can just look around the temple and see, all you see is space. And then you go outside and you see the temples in space, and it goes on and on. So the sankharas are in space. And space is it a sankhara? Because if there was no consciousness, which is quite obvious, you can just look around the temple and see, all you see is space. And then you go outside and you see the temples in space, and it goes on and on. So the sankharas are in space. And space is it a sankhara? Because if there was no consciousness, would there be any space? Space has no beginning or end. But it has no purpose of its own. It has no reason to exist other than through consciousness. And then you realize your true nature is pure consciousness rather than the limited consciousness you believe, you've been told, you've been convinced you are, this limited form, this gender, this monk or nun, and all that. These are conventions. Conventions are all sankharas. They're forms, so we have this Thai forest convention, the Theravada Pali tradition is a convention, the sankharas, so it's not perfect. But it's managed to survive for 2,500, over 60 years, as a convention, which says a lot for it. It's not anything to just dismiss. Old-fashioned conventions, the intellect could dismiss it as saying it's old-fashioned, it's out of date. And Theravada Buddhism is out of date. I've heard people criticize. Western intellects criticize the ancient religions, religious forms, as they're out of date, you've got to modernize it. Who says that? You know, it's another sankhara, talking about the sankhara that really doesn't understand, but just has views about the ideal modern conventions are better than ancient ones. These are views and opinions. So when you put consciousness first, and you talk about dependent origination, avijja bhajya sankhara, ignorance creates sankharas. That's the beginning of paticca samuppada. Avijja bhajya sankhara, sankhara bhajya vijnana. So when we create sankharas out of ignorance, they affect consciousness. Sankharas don't create consciousness, they influence it. So avijja is the Pali word for not understanding Dhamma, not realizing pure consciousness. We create sankharas which we grasp and identify with. So our whole sense of a personal, unique self, separate self, is an illusion. Now when you get old, if you look back on life, I have so many memories. And they arise and cease. And so I have very happy memories of my early childhood life. It was a happy childhood. My parents were quite kind and caring and loving parents. I never felt abused or unloved, because my first 5 years of experience were just generating a sense of there was security and happiness, and so that has affected my whole life. Because what you get when you're born, what your mother tells you, or your carer tells you, your nurse tells you, is about how to be a good boy, a good girl, how to, how good boys act, how good girls act, how right and wrong things are, and when you're naughty or you get punished, and when you're obeying your mother and father, you get rewarded. When you're a good student and you bring an apple to the teacher, you get rewarded. When you play a practical joke on the teacher, you get punished. So you learn that reward and punishment depends on playing the game of life. Now, on a karmic level, we all have different backgrounds. So, a child told he or she was unloved, unlovable, ugly, wicked, and basically evil. That's their initial view of themselves that they get from an unloving mother or nurse or nanny, which they carry through their whole life. You just think in your own life how much your early life affects your present experience of life. So it's important to reflect on it. The memories of the past aren't always synchronize. You know, they're like phantoms that arise and cease. At 91 years old, I still can remember when I was 5. And it's like the memories of being 5 years old. It's like, you know, they come and go. They have no sustaining, they can't sustain themselves. You can't keep them. They're like phantoms or ghosts that pass through your conscious mind. This year will be my 60th Vasa. 60 years as a bhikkhu. And this has given me this wonderful opportunity to really learn from life. You have the time, the encouragement, the convention that helps one to realize what you really, truly, your true nature is. It's not that after 60 years I've just become a good bhikkhu. It's because during the teachings that I've received in this tradition have given me all the encouragement and support to investigate life. Luang Phor Sumedho was an investigator. He really encouraged investigation, using the Four Noble Truths as a kind of foundation for doing that. So 60 years of having such marvelous encouragement is a wonderful thing, you know, and I look back on my life as a monk, and I have nothing but gratitude. Because I don't know what it was within me that kept me in the road for so long. How I could endure all kinds of difficulties, physical, emotional difficulties, having to conform to conventions and Vinaya, and having to live in a kind of mendicant style of life. But I could have easily just, as a layman, I could easily just gone back to the United States, where I could get further education and make money and buy a car and all kinds of luxuries that a monk can have. So this sequence of Vijnana yani Dasananantam Sampado Param means pure consciousness, not consciousness dependent on sense organs. And this needs for you to really treasure that your true nature is pure consciousness rather than consciousness through your senses, which can be very deluding. Senses are not trustworthy. Basically, they change. They weaken with age. They can easily create fantasies, ghosts, illusions, caught up in all kinds of conspiracy theories, ideas, ideals. And when you know your true nature, then there's nothing left to know. What do you need to know beyond your true nature is perfect. Now, if I go around saying my true nature is perfect, then you're going to interpret that as a kind of overestimation. Adam's the man who's overestimating his fellow, telling people he's perfect. So it's something you don't say in words, you know through experience, through realizing Dhamma for yourself. It's apparent here and now, timeless. Wake up and see it. Come and see, investigate it. So I was telling one of the monks the other day about living in Hampstead in the first 2 years in London. And there was Hampstead is a very nice, interesting part of London to live in. And so a lot of artists, writers, celebrities live there. And it's near Hampstead Heath, which is an extraordinary park. The highest point in London is on Hampstead Heath. And so every morning we take our own bulls and we walk from the Vihara to Hampstead Heath, spend the morning walking around. It's quite spacious. A lot of it's cultivated, a lot of it is just wild heathland. And there was a woman fiction writer that started coming to Hampstead. And she was lived in Hampstead Village. And she told me she'd been with the lay teachers that had occupied the Hampstead Vihara before, after the founder of the Hampstead Vihara passed away. So there was a young man who was a disciple of Kapilavattho and his wife, who used to teach Dhamma to this woman, this writer. And then they went to Thailand. They went to some monastery in Thonburi on the other side of the Chao River from Bangkok. And they became arahants. So when they came back to Hampstead, they told everybody that they're arahants. And this writer said, they were much better teachers before they were arahants. There's this thing, you call yourself an arahant. You know, that's a convention. And you think, what becomes an arahant if it's a sankhara? Can this body ever become an arahant? Can my memories, can my thoughts, I can grasp the idea I'm an arahant and delude myself? Avijja bhajaya sankhara, ignorance produces sankhara. What is there? Is this body an arahant? Is my memory, my mind, my emotions? The emotions are still like everyone else's. When my mother died, I felt sad. When my father died, I felt sad. When Pacha passed away, I grieved. Those are just human emotions. They're not the emotions that produce through avijja, through sankhara, rather than through enlightenment, through Dhamma. So investigating just this old human body is nothing, nothing to grasp, to identify with. It's an old human male form. And it's not a really, it's just an empty sankhara. Rather than claiming to be enlightened or a stream enter or a sakadagami or a anagami or arahant. These are superlative words. The ego wants to become a stream enterer. The ego wants to become an arahant. So you can't trust that. When you grasp that word, then you're deluding yourself. So when I say there are no arahants, as persons, as physical forms, was Luang Phor an arahant. He never made any claim to attainment of even the slightest hint. He was very careful not to proclaim any gifts, any psychic powers, any special gifts that he might have acquired as a monk. The arahantship is apparent here and now, timeless. It's through being a witness to Dhamma, to the nature of sankharas as impermanent and not personal. So is this whole body a person? According to convention, yes, fair enough. Fair enough to say it's a person, and that's convention. But is this whole body, is it an arahant? No, it's not. So what is arahantship other than the realization of your true nature, pure consciousness, apparent here and now, timeless, encouraging investigation, looking inward other than outward, open-eyed Dhamma, apparent here and now and timeless, and to be realized individually. You have to realize it for yourself. So one time in my early monastic life, I felt I've attained stream entry. So I went to Luang Phor and I asked, Ajahn Chah, am I a stream entry? And he said, how should I know? Which was absolutely brilliant. There's only you know. You're the one that's witnessing life through this separate form. But I kept thinking, I want to verify I'm a experimenter, then I can tell everybody. What is that? That's sakaditi, that's ego. Now I experienced, when I was a Samanera in Luang Phor before I met Ajahn Chah, I went through a period, I lived in a little hut, a meditation hut, a kuti, and they bring me food once a day, but there was no teacher. There was no meditation teacher that could speak English. And all I had was that book that I give to everyone who Word of the Buddha. And so that's all I had to read. I didn't take any books, any novels, anything other than that slim volume called Word of the Buddha. And I'm by nature as a layman, I was a real bookworm. I loved reading. I read the classics, the Shakespeare, and all those kind of things, so I really didn't want to get involved in this experiment as a Samanera. And so I completely determined not to take anything, no newspapers, no journals, and just, if I had to read, I'd read Word of the Buddha. So the first 3 months, the first 3 days were quite pleasant, because I'd been living a very busy life. And suddenly I was all alone in a little hut in a forest in northeastern Thailand. And I just felt such a kind of relief of not having to relate to anybody. Didn't have to teach any. I was an English language teacher. And so first 3 days were like bliss, and then after that it all became rather hellish. All my past started arising. And I learned this meditation technique, what they call the Mahasi Sayadaw technique, which you have to move in slow motion and eat your food in slow motion and do everything in slow motion. And just 24 hours a day trying to do that. With the most conflicting, nightmarish thoughts coming into my mind. And I tried to suppress them through mindfulness of the breath, through the technique, but I couldn't suppress all the repressed anger of 31 years. I couldn't, in no way, being alone, I could suppress it as a layman by watching television or smoking cigarettes or doing something, eating, munching on pastries and things like that, or calling my friends on the phone. There were so many distractions available as a layman, but as this kind of hermit life of a Samanera in Nongkai, there's no escape. It's the 4 walls of a wooden hut, which had no electricity. They gave me a candle to light and a box of matches. And for 3 months, first 3 months I was there, it was like a living nightmare. Not due to any of the people in the monastery, they were very good to me, but just so much repressed anger in my life for 31 years. I always thought I was not a very angry person, saw myself as being a rather nice guy, but so much hatred and criticism and anger that I'd repressed. And when I had no way to stop it, I just had to endure it. After about 3 months, it stopped. All this anger just vanished. And I thought, suddenly I woke up one morning and I wasn't angry. The kuti looked like a palace to me, everything was beautiful. It was like a marvelous stunning experience of luminosity. And I kept hearing this, what I call sound of silence, just like a hum. I didn't know what it was though, I had no idea, I knew not what you call it, but I still believed that all conditions are impermanent, so I saw it as a condition. And then I thought it was enlightened. And now it's, 3 months and I'm enlightened, that's pretty good. So then it lasted for about a week, and then I had to renew my visa. And there's an immigration office in Luang Phor, and they were very rude to me. And suddenly this luminosity just disappeared, completely vanished. But it was like an act of grace, a gift that just through being able to endure just being alone and witnessing the most ugly kind of thoughts and feelings without trying to suppress them, and they all went away. All that anger, repressed anger, completely disappeared. So it gave me a lot of inspiration to pursue the word of the Buddha through suffering and its causes. So suffering is the nature of sankhara. Trying to repress and run away from suffering doesn't resolve the issue at all, it just creates more suffering. So through sati sampajanya, through mindfulness and wisdom, one can realize what the Buddha is pointing to, that all conditions are impermanent, and there's no separate self to suffer. So that's, speaking from personal experience, the silence behind all the emotions, behind all the anger, behind all the resentment, is pure consciousness, and it's perfect. It's anatta, it's not personal, it's not like mine. So you see that consciousness, pure consciousness, is the universal reality, its wholeness, completeness. It can't be sullied or soiled in any way. And yet, out of avijja, out of ignorance of that, we grasp the sankharas. Seeing the body, the past history, memories, and emotions, and so forth as very personal experiences. So the first fetter is sakya ditti, which is some Pali word for what we translate as the ego. Mito, mitom. Sakya ditti is the big obstruction. So, during this winter's retreat, just to get to realize what you're thinking, the belief of yourself as a separate person, as in any conditioned form, a monk or nun, a man or woman. This is convention, it's sankhara, and you begin to lose interest in it. You're not trying to become enlightened or a stream entry, anything. You're not trying to get samadhi or get rid of kilesas. You're beginning to realize that Dhamma is apparent here and now. It's conscious awareness that is not personal. So like consciousness in this sense, pure consciousness, is universal. It's where it covers all space, all forms. Without, if there was no consciousness, how could there be forms or space? So consciousness is the word of the age, because nobody seems to understand it. They're, like psychiatrists, psychologists are looking for consciousness, trying to define it. You can't define it. There's no definition for consciousness except it's pure, apparent here and now, and timeless. And that's what you realize for yourself is bhajatam. Ben bhajatam, Buddha's all using that word. Ben bhajatam, it's to be realized individually through wisdom. So I offer this as a reflection for today.